It's the end of the road for the UFC legend. Nate's been involved with the company for almost 2 decades, and he finally thought it was time to focus on something else. It took a crazy fight week and bad weight cuts for him to get a good fight, and boy did he capitalize on the opportunity. Today we'll be looking at Nate's vintage performance in his final bout. Firstly, we should look at what happened leading up to the fight. He asked for Poirier, Ferguson, Luke, and a dozen other guys, but what he got was the Boers. The matchmakers thought it would be a good idea to make 37-year-old former lightweight Nate Diaz fight the undefeated Khamzat Chimaev, who's fought at middleweight. In terms of business, it was the right call. Nate wanted to leave the company. The UFC didn't want him to win his last fight, so they gave him a rising star so he could get the spotlight. Thanks for the cheese, Nate. See you later. If you know the Diaz brothers, they're never gonna turn down a fight, but things started getting crazy when right before the scheduled press conference just a couple of days before the fight, there's no footage of what happened, but from what Dana White said, Khamzat got into a confrontation with Kevin Holland, who was fighting in the co-main event. The fight escalated, and then it was Diaz's camp involved in the fight as well. There was about 100 people fighting, and the UFC couldn't contain this properly and had to cancel the press conference, which has never happened before. If you think about the worst thing, Khamzat missed weight by 7.5 pounds, which made the UFC cancel the bout. Next up, a miracle pulled off. Say what you want about fighter pay, but the management of the UFC definitely knows how to deal with a crisis. After Khamzat missed weight, they still need an opponent for Nate around whom the fight card was built. Enter El Kukoi. Tony Ferguson was also on the card scheduled to fight Jingliang. He got bumped into the main event. Khamzat found Holland, the guy he went after before the press conference, and the Leech got to face Daniel Rodriguez. So it worked out for everyone. Gotta imagine the fighters demanded a lot of money for them to change opponents one day before the fight. In a way, this worked out even better than the original plan. No one really wanted to see Nate face Khamzat. Today is also a legend of the sport who fights in the same weight class. It's a dream matchup. Many people even suspected that this was all a controversy, so they couldn't change the opponents, which is just beyond the limits of the UFC. Or is it? Let us know what you think. Now, for the big news, Nate pulls off the finish. The MMA gods gave us what we wanted. The two legends had an epic showdown, and it was interesting. When you put two guys in the cage and they both have awkward and unorthodox styles, it makes for a very weird fight. The rounds were back and forth. Diaz looked sharp with his hands, and Tony was kicking the legs like you're supposed to when you're fighting a guy like Nate. The exchanges were fun, and Diaz landing volume on the head and Ferguson mixing it up. The fight went to the 4th round. Tony's corner kept on calling him to shoot for a takedown, which was the worst advice that you could give him. As soon as Tony shot, Nate snatched his neck and locked him in the guillotine. And then came the biggest surprise. Tony actually tapped for the first time in his career. He didn't tap to the armbar by Oliveira or the knee bar by Diaz, and they were both super tight. This makes you wonder if Tony's still that guy. Nevertheless, the night belonged to Nate. This was his first finish since 2016 when he submitted Conor McGregor. He ended his career on a high note. With that being said, what's next for Nate? After the fight, Diaz was interviewed by Joe Rogan, in which he was asked about his future plans. Nate still wanted to leave the UFC. He said he wants to go and be the best at another sport, whether it's boxing or jiu-jitsu, and when he's done at that, he'll come back to the UFC and become a UFC champ, which is the greatest title in the world. Nate's decision of leaving the company isn't due to bad blood. He just wants to try something different. Good things happen to those who try, but the question still remains, when and where will we see him compete? The most obvious answer would be Jake Paul. The problem child has made a career out of having boxing matches with former UFC fighters in their late 30s with a minimal striking background. Nate matches the description, but he'll probably have a tougher challenge than anyone he's faced. Paul is scheduled to box Anderson Silva, who's considered by many as the greatest fighter of all time. Silva's 20 years older than Paul, so there's a significant chance that Jake pulls it off. And then we finally have a scrap between him and Nate early next year. There's another possible scenario that could happen no matter how impossible it sounds. The UFC wouldn't let one of their biggest stars go away. The only reason why they were willing to let him end his contract was that he was going to fight a young guy that he had a very slim chance of beating. Now that he won, they'll throw a massive amount of money to try to convince him to stay. Remember when Khabib retired? This is going to be just like that. And who knows? Maybe Nate would accept an offer that's big enough. Other related news, first up, Chimaev goes untouched again. In the co-main event, we saw the Boers take on Big Mouth. Holland had a condition for accepting the fight. He wanted it to be 5 rounds. He got that, but the fight couldn't even get out of the first. Chimaev shot within the first 10 seconds. Holland tried rolling a couple times, but Khamzat used up all his energy to get the fight to the ground. He ended up locking in the Darce choke and Holland tapped. Another dominant performance for the Boers. This is his 4th UFC fight in which he hasn't taken a single strike. He took 1 strike in his debut and had a war with Durinho, for which the entertainment was a lot more important. Khamzat was booed by the entire arena for missing weight, and he decided to play along, giving fans the bird, saying he doesn't care about the weight. It's fascinating how just in a matter of a few hours, he went from being one of the most beloved fighters to a proper heel. There's still a lot of concern about his future. Missing weight by so much is a big deal. He would have fought for the title after beating Diaz, but now the company would be concerned about his weight. Maybe middleweight is where he'll thrive. Next up, the Leech becomes a fan favorite. We don't see a lot of nice guys in the sport, and when we do, we show them the love they deserve. The Chinese fighter's become a fan favorite in the last week. It all started in the first embedded episode in which we saw him greeting his former opponent Chimaev with absolute respect. Lee showed us a suit that he had purchased specifically for the press conference. It all started going downhill when the press conference was cancelled. Lee was about to talk on the stage when the rug was pulled off and he couldn't show off the nice suit. Fans took to Twitter and showed love to Lee. But it keeps getting worse for him. Tony got bumped to the main event. As a result, the Leech was asked to fight Daniel Rodriguez, who was just 10 pounds heavier than him. He still accepted the fight without giving anyone trouble. The fight itself was competitive, but it was quite clear that the Leech had won all the rounds, or 2 of them at the very least. But the judges decided to rob him and gave Rodriguez the split decision win. The guy just can't catch a break. Hopefully things will work out better for him from here on. And finally, 2 of the best bantamweights clash this week. Just because the next pay-per-view is a month away doesn't mean we can't enjoy some kick-ass fighting cards in the meantime. The Sandman Corey Sandhagen is scheduled to fight Song Yaodong. Sandhagen has been facing a tough time with back-to-back losses against former champions. He needs this win to get back on the right track. The fight will be fireworks, and it's a great opportunity for Yaodong to show the world that he can beat up one of the best in the world. Giga Chikadze will be in the co-main event. Talk about stacking up elite strikers in one card. This is a can't miss. That's a wrap for this video. What do you think is next for Nate? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.